I've just pulled into my grandmother and grandfather Pattersons' farm. Uh, my grandfather and grandmother built this house sometime in the 1930s. It's been renovated a time or two over the 90 years that it's been here, and my niece Leah Kraft Lawrence was the last. Her and her husband lived here up until close to a year ago, I guess, a little more than a year ago. And but this is a place that has some wonderful memories for me, growing up and coming here as a young kid and playing in the backyard and seeing all sorts of critters, snakes and frogs. And I remember one day being here and a frog was hopping across the backyard close to the well house, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, because I love frogs and I always would try to catch them, and about the time I started after it, here come a snake that came up behind the frog and grabbed it, and I was only probably 5 or 6 feet away from it when that happened. But my grandmother and grandfather lived here. My grandfather passed away in 1984, September of '84. My grandmother passed away in 1987. And so this has just been a great place for me to visit. And I guess when I was about 10 years old, my family, my grandparents gave my mother and dad some property, and we built a house probably less than 300 yards away from my grandparents, and that was in 1972. My grandfather and my dad basically built the house and contracted out some of the work, but I ended up living right beside them from the time I was 10 years old until, like I said, my grandfather passed away, and of course then my grandmother just a couple, 3 years later. But my grandfather raised cattle. He was a cattle farmer, lots of hay baling that went on in those days, and that's how I learned to drive a truck as an 8-year-old, believe it or not, 8-year-old boy. My grandfather put me in his brand new Chevrolet Silverado pickup, and I pulled the trailer around the pasture, and my dad and grandfather threw the bales up on the back of the trailer, and of course I'd drive it back down to the barn, and then I'd get out and let one of them back it into the area where we could unload it. And of course at that time, as a kid, I couldn't stand it. I wanted to be out there throwing that hay up, until the day came where I did get out of the truck and was out there throwing the hay up, and boy, I wanted back in that truck more than I could even explain to you, because during the summer, and I know a lot of you have hauled and baled hay, and it doesn't get much hotter than that. And of course, as a young boy, my grandfather taught me that during the summer you wore long sleeves when you worked outside, because it served as a kind of an air conditioning on your arms, and just really you would cool off if there was ever a breeze or something like that. It sure helped. Of course, consumed a whole lot of water in those days, but yeah, my grandfather was a cattle farmer, and I mean really knew his craft. He always kept journals of his cattle. He could pinpoint within just a few days of when a cow was going to have a calf, and so it was pretty interesting to sit and listen to him talk. But not only that, but to listen to other people that would come and talk with him and sit on this front porch. And there used to be a swing there, but I can recall many a times being here and somebody pull up in the yard and and talk with him. I remember J.P. Kane used to talk to my grandfather about cattle. Jimmy Yarber, who lives up the road here a piece, used to come and talk to my grandfather about cattle, and he was a pretty well respected cattleman, and I remember loading cows up down here at the barn and going with him to the cattle sale in Decatur, and also went with him to Coleman one time. Got sick on that trip. I remember my grandfather was one that always wanted to make sure I had whatever I needed, and of course I got to the cattle barn and Coleman, and man, they had hot dogs and peanuts, and so I had a couple of hot dogs and was eating a bag of peanuts and just got deathly sick, and that trip was not as fun as some of the other ones. And also carrying some of our cattle to the slaughterhouse, and I can remember my grandfather calling me one day up the road here and asked me did I want to go with him to the slaughterhouse, and of course I knew exactly what that was, and he said, hey, ask Leanne, your sister, she wants to go with us. And of course I was again probably 10 or 11, and Leanne was probably 13 years old, somewhere in there, and she didn't have no clue what he was asking us to do, but I just asked her, hey, you want to go with me and Papa to carry cattle, one of the head of cattle to Decatur? And of course she said yeah, so we walked across the pasture and came down here and got to the barn, and Papa and myself run the cow up into the trailer, and we loaded up and headed off to Decatur and got over to that area, and of course Leanne was like me, she was interested in seeing everything, and I remember we pulled up to the slaughterhouse, and we backed the trailer up, and the cow was let out and into this little pen, and a man came out with a .22, and my grandfather and me and Leanne sat there, and my sister had no clue what was about to happen, and all of a sudden, bam, he just shot the cow, and it went down, and Leanne started screaming. She didn't know what was going on, but that was just the process of how you got meat back in those days, and we always had freezer full of any kind of steaks, hamburger meat, and that's how I grew up. I grew up eating the cattle off of this farm, and of course my sister, it took her a while to ever eat a hamburger again. I don't know where she thought it came from, but I always gave her a rough time about that. But this is just a beautiful place, and of course my brother-in-law Billy Kraft and myself, we own this farm and this land here now, and Billy lives in the house where I grew up in, and I live just 2 houses over, and so we've just really I enjoy living right here, and I've said many a times, a lot of people have a lot of memories, but I can walk out my door and live them every day, just living within 150, 200 yards of this property myself. So I'm just going to ride around a little bit and show you my grandparents' house. Where you see that old garage right there, it used to be just my grandparents parked their car in it, but it also had a cooling area where my grandfather actually raised a few hogs, and of course would have them, he would slaughter them and then hang up the hams in the cool area of the garage back here, and It was sort of an open garage. It didn't have no door to close it up or anything like that, but lots of good eating off of that also. That was a new well. That was not the original well, but right here used to be a line of apple trees that I'm pulling into area that was the pasture back years ago. Of course, that fence has been taken down over the years, and I can remember one year lightning struck one of these big trees about where that electrical pole was, and I mean just split it. And we happened to be over here at my grandparents' when that storm came up, and of course, pecan trees right here in this area, lots of them. There's my brother-in-law Billy coming to mow the grass. Right there's my grandfather's barn. It's kind of went through some tough stuff over the years, with the wind blowing metal off the roof and some of the siding coming down, but still a neat place for me. I do have a guy that rents the pasture now. I say rents. He has several cattle here, and he's a relative to a family that's kin to us, and he has several head of cattle. And Scott, he's a heck of a nice guy. That's a look inside there, the barn, and I can remember a lot of cattle over the years being brought in, and of course right straight ahead was the loading chute. They would go in from this side and have a tractor or a trailer backed up, and of course we'd open the gate and they would be put in from the other side. Just a lot of neat memories right here. About to get stuck. Of course, that tree right there is one that I've taken a lot of pictures of over the years. That tree's got to be at least 95 to 100 years old. I've got some old pictures years ago in the 60s of when it was growing and pretty tall, but it had not filled out like it is today. But that is I call that my family tree. Actually, I wouldn't mind being buried under that tree one day. I also seen a lot of hawks right in this area over the last few months. Seeing them come in, and I don't know if there's a nest up in the tree. I haven't went on the other side. I can't see a nest from this side, but I have definitely looked over the last few months to try to find one and hadn't been able to do it. Or I say months, last 2 or 3 weeks, that's when we've seen them the most. I really appreciate my brother-in-law cutting this grass, because I'm in a kind of a tough situation right now with my hip and not able to do everything I need to do and wish I could do. And so he comes and mows this grass every week or so, and I really appreciate it.